Hello everybody, welcome back to Dominions 5. We are continuing our series looking at our game as Tien, the BumbleRumble game, which is still ongoing. I've gotten most of the turns saved, but I'm not doing a whole Let's Play re-recording because I don't remember all of the details. Instead, we're kind of doing a game plan analysis. We're looking at the different phases of the game and what are our important priorities in terms of research, in terms of what units we're building, and we're also always trying to relate this back to our initial build, right? So these are all things that you can foresee before the game starts, and you need to be thinking about when you're trying to, decide how am I going to play a nation. So I've gone ahead and loaded up turn 50 in the game. Unfortunately, I don't have on this computer at the moment all the turns from like 35 to 50, which were the turns that covered my war against Mictlan, which, as you can see, I have won. I have just taken over Mictlan itself. So just for fun, I think at some later point I am going to go through as many of my turn files as possible and find any interesting battles that I've seen between other players, but I'm not doing that right now. Right now, let me just give you a very quick diplomatic overview of what's progressed. Now we're in the mid game. The turn 50 is like the mid game, maybe the end of the mid game. So a lot of the major wars have happened. I do not remember at this point what is going on underwater. I'm pretty sure Atlantis has killed Pelagia by now. On land, so if you'll recall, at the last video I showed you turn 30. On turn 30, Marignan and Mictlan were invading Agartha and had almost succeeded. Now, since then, I have attacked Mictlan, and Marignan has been attacked by Shinuyama. Shinuyama has started his first major war. So he's at war against Marignan. This has allowed Agartha this has given him a bit of breathing room, so he's kind of reclaimed most of his territory over here. He also was involved in some war with Archocephaly, I think. But so is Pythium. So Pythium, who finished off Phlegra, has now taken over Archocephaly, and that's sort of a pretty epic war that's been going on for a while. Meanwhile, over here, Physia, whose start is on this island, has killed Jotunheim. Over here in this part of the world. This over here is Vanarus. I think the capital is somewhere here. Yeah, here. There's the capital. So Vanarus has attacked Man and has basically killed Man. Man had previously been attacking Cetis. Now, Cetis has been pretty small, but nobody's been able to kill him quite yet. Vanarus now has killed Man and seems like he could finish Cetis off, but for now that doesn't seem to have happened. Ulm is kind of stuck in his forever war with Cetis and Pangaea. Cetis, even though he has almost nothing left, is still kind of trying to do something against Ulm. I'm not sure why, but that's happening. Here we have Pangaea has been basically conquered by Ys and Atlantis, so both Atlantis and Ys basically seem to have rushed to take over Pangaea, to kill Pangaea. So Pangaea is basically gone, and I think that is it. Just for the super fast Diplo update. Okay, so what I want to talk about in this episode is, I guess, a few things. So after the early game, we've got a lot of priorities. I want to talk about the mid game and sort of the spells that you need and the priority that you need to win your first major war. But there are a few things that I definitely need to talk about in terms of late game priorities, because there are stepping stones, right, to reach those late game priorities. So in fact, yeah, so we might divide this into 2 episodes. I haven't quite planned this out. Let's briefly talk about the late game. There are one important aspect of Dominions, besides having armies that can fight successfully. So this is not specific to the late game. This is also true in the mid game. But thugs and raiding is a really important part of fighting in Dominions. And a thug is just like a unit that on his own can take on a small army or PD easily. Now, it's a sliding scale, right? Because you can have a very cheap thug that you're willing to expand and you're willing to risk losing. Once you start not being willing to risk losing it, then you're kind of crossing that weird zone between thug and like more of a super combatant, but then it's not necessarily able to kill a whole army on its own. So do you bring the thug with a bit of mage support, right? There's a lot, it can be a gray zone. In any case, we're Tianqi, we have no thugs. One of the big weaknesses of this nation is that, well, it's a human nation. So as a human nation, none of our chassis are really suitable for thugging. We don't have any national summons that are thugs. We don't have any special commanders. So the only thing we have is whatever is available, by default in Dominions. And in terms of thuggable chassis, I mean, there are things that are available, but it's not amazing. So, you can, and you need thugs for a few things. They are great for raiding, but you can do raiding other ways, right? You can raid with small armies. So there are, and I've got heavy cavalry. So, a small group of heavy cavalry can take out a lot of PD. So I don't really need the thugs for raiding. This is going to depend a lot on who you're fighting and what their capabilities are. But one thing you have to think about is, what if you need to have a special item brought into a fight? Like, let's say you need a Staff of Storms because they have flyers that you need to keep grounded. Well, who's going to carry the Staff of Storms? Because the toughest guy I have is maybe a general, but even he can be killed by any remote assassination spell. And at this point in the game, you can bet that the opponent has remote assassination spells. So you can get really unlucky and just lose your guy. So you kind of want to put those valuable items, battlefield wide, casting items, on a tougher thug. So what are your options? I mean, the only options really would be something like, let's see, we could do like a Bane Lord, but we need death for that, which natively we don't have access to. The same thing if you were all the way up to Conjuration 8, then you can definitely do Wraith Lord. Sorry, Conjuration 7 Wraith Lords, right? You could do Troll Kings, right? So Earth Troll Kings, Water Troll Kings, they take a fair amount of gems. So Water Troll Kings are nice because in many games are worth getting just because they can get you underground fairly easily. Plus the units they come with are nice regenerating kind of beefy guys. Troll Kings have Earth, which makes them fairly decent thugs. It's a pretty good path. The Water Kings can do, first of all, they're water gem generators. Water gives you quickness, and you can do a few other useful buffs. So if you give them enough armor, then you're all set. Not terrible choices. It can be a little expensive in terms of the gems. But these are also not sort of super serious thugs. Like, they're kind of mid-gamey stuff. They're okay for raiding, but then you're thinking like, oh, I'm going to put a bunch of gear on them to make them better. But then you're putting all that gear on like a 40 hit point thug, and somebody shows up with real thugs or super combatants, and then you're kind of screwed. So there aren't that many good thug options for everybody. There are only a few, really. And so one option is Elemental Royalty. Elemental Royalty are the guys that are available at Conjuration 8. You've got a handful of each, and they're unique. So if one person gets them, you can't get them back unless they die, and then you can try to get them by summoning them before the other guy does. So you've got fire dudes, you've got air dudes, you've got water dudes. Well, they're ladies, dudettes, because these are female. And then you have earth dudes, There is a King of Banefires who is a fire death dude. There is a blood earth dude who is in blood, and that is pretty much it. My personal opinion is that in most games, elemental royalty are a bit overrated. The problem is you can only one nation can get them, and probably somebody is going to rush for Conjuration 8, probably because it synergizes well with another part of their nation's build. That is not the case for us as Tien. So by the time I get to Conjuration 8, I'm sure that somebody will have already taken the elemental royalty. So it's not really worth trying, because I don't want to waste all these gems casting the spell, right, when there's a very good chance that the royalty has already been taken. The other reason people get elemental royalty is because they help you cast those big battlefield spells that, like Fog Warriors with an Air Queen or stuff like that. Or, Army of Lead with an Earth King. But we're a communion nation, so we can cast anything we want. We just need to stick enough communion mages in our communion. So that's really not necessary for us. So what I'm trying to say here is that, rushing up Conjuration 8 to get thugs with elemental royalty, not really a thing we're going to do. In the late game, you can do Tartarians, right? The thing with Tartarians is that only one player can do Tartarians. Because, I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but basically that's how it works. Tartarians have a 1 in 4 chance of, or have a 1 in 4 chance of not being feeble-minded. So two things happen. First of all, when you summon a Tartarian, they are not a commander yet. They are just a unit. You need to then either cast Gift of Reason, which is 4 nature and costs 20 nature gems, or Divine Name, which is S5 and costs 25 astral gems. So in addition to the 10 death gem cost to summon them, which by the way is doable, but does take some items. So a Lich is death 4, then a Skull Staff is going to bring you to death 5. What do you do for the next 2 death items? You can do a hat, that's going to bring you up 1, but a hat is 50 death gems, so you need to have a decent death income before you even start doing Tartarians. Or maybe you have some other global boosters. Maybe you have like a Ring of Sorcery, Ring of Wizardry if you had a lot of astral gems. Maybe you've crafted Robe of the Magi with air and blood. There are a handful of artifact items that boost death. So it takes a bit of doing unless your pretender has really high death paths. Anyways, once you summon a Tartarian, it needs to be made into a commander. But even so, 3/4 of them are feeble-minded. And honestly, a feeble-minded Tartarian is kind of like a heavy paperweight. I mean, it's typically like got a lot of hit points, sure, and you can give it items, but without the magic paths, that really takes a lot like out of it. Now, you paid 10 death plus, let's say, 20 nature, so 30 gems for that chassis is like not terrible, but some of the chassis don't have all the item slots, right? They don't have feet and stuff like that. I mean, there's one that's like a flying monster. There are 4 different chassis. It's really, and plus they have other afflictions too. Typically, it's not just feeble-minded. They might have all sorts of other afflictions. So you need to cure their afflictions, and there is only one way to cure afflictions from undead, and that is with the global spell Gift of Health. As far as I know, and although I have not completely extensively tested it, I've tested many of the things that people think work. No, nothing works. There's an artifact called the Chalice. It does not work. Units that have the healer ability, not heal disease, but healer, does not work on undead units. The only thing that works is Gift of Health. If you don't have Gift of Health, then you can still do Tartarians, but only 1 in 4 are going to be viable. Now, to tell you the truth, summoning Tartarians themselves is not too expensive. It's only 10 death gems. So you can kind of just churn them out and then promote the ones that aren't that aren't feeble-minded, that's something you can do, but it's a lot less efficient. Okay, that's Tartarians. The other option is blood. In Deep Blood, you've got a bunch of... First of all, there are Demon Lords. This is way down at Blood 9, okay? There are, I forget how many, 7-ish unique Demon Lords that you can summon. They're all pretty different. Typically, some of them you end up fighting. They have good paths that are useful in battle. Some of them can make excellent super combatants. Others, you're just kind of probably keep at home and cast blood rituals and other rituals. But these are pretty nice. You have a Heliophagai, singular, I guess would be at the Heliophagus. They are blood, death, and they're most of them are assassins, or they're not assassins, but they're great assassin chassis because they have invisibility. So once you're in blood, you can give them like the black heart or whatever it is to make them assassins. Pretty good units. And then you've just got archdevils, which are fire guys. But here at Blood 7 archdevils, we're not so much talking like a super combatant chassis, but kind of pretty thuggy. But like fire alone is not like an amazing path to just go send raiding against PD. If you were doing that, you would send vampires, and you're probably going to get vampires anyways to make your blood economy. So vampires are definitely a thug that everybody can get if they break into blood. The other kind of thug that's kind of like a vampire would be a Wraith Lord. Wraith Lords are pretty good. They're ethereal, high protection, good fighters. They don't have a ton of hit points, is one weakness. The other weakness, it's not a weakness. I mean, they're immortal, but nowadays immortal, they cost 40 death gems. They're not cheap, and immortal is no longer super immortal because you can kill immortal units and it won't come back if you kill them with Soul Slay. So you kind of have to devote some of their some of their equipment slots to magic resistance so they don't get Soul Slayed. Still, those are definitely an option. That's it. I mean, there are a few odd ones. Like there's a Worm Mage in nature, but he's a little tricky to work with because if you put items on him and he kind of dies in his first form, he becomes bugs, and then you lose the items. So it's a bit trickier to work with. I mean, there are a handful of other summons, but in terms of the really useful raiding thug chassis or super combatants, you might have noticed a pattern. It's all death or blood. And as Tien, we do not natively have access to death or blood. So we're coming back full circles. We're closing all those parentheses. That is why I like to do a Rainbow Pretender build. Now he's wearing a Ring of Sorcery, which is why his paths are a little boosted. Early in maybe it was a couple of episodes ago, we talked about different builds that you can do, right? And how you could have a sort of a Wake Titan, not a Wake Titan, like a Dormant Titan, or sort of a Killy statue, Bless. Honestly, that's going to be fine if you're playing like a smaller game that you don't expect to go to the very late game. But if you think your game is going to go to the late game, I think you need to seriously think about ensuring you have death and blood access. Because it's a big shortcoming that we can't really make up for in other ways. We are able to deal with enemy thugs because we have communion mages and we have good troops, right? So we have ways to deal with thugs, but using our own thugs, we just don't have any. So we've got to come up with something. Therefore, that being said, I think it is important. I think strategically, you should put up Gift of Health during the game at some point, especially in a large game like this. Global slots are going to fill up pretty quickly. In fact, I'm surprised that there aren't more up by now, by turn 50. I guess it's because people were fighting wars and didn't have the gems to spare. Global slots tend to fill up quickly. And here's the thing. So let's say you don't put up Gift of Health. you finally made it to the end game where you've got Conjuration 8. When you've finally got Conjuration 9. So this is a late game, right? You've got Conjuration 9. You're ready to make your Tartareans. You've got your Liches. You've got all that. You've invested all your death that was so hard to come by into more boosters. You've got your Lich. You're ready to cast Tartareans. Now you want to put up Gift of Health, right? To make them not feeble-minded. But the problem is by now, the global list has filled up. So you're going to have to overwrite somebody else's global, right? First of all, it might be one of your own globals. Second of all, by now, you probably have a couple of globals that have been cast once and then already overwritten by somebody else. So, for example, like Maelstrom here is like an underwater, water spell. Ys has put it up. I wouldn't be surprised if soon, if some point in the future, Atlantis decides to overcast this, right? So that means, the first Maelstrom was only put up with minimum gems, probably, right? 100 gems or whatever. When you overcast it, you're going to put like 200 in it to make sure you get it, or 250 or something. I mean, whatever. That means if I want to put up a Gift of Health after all the global slots are full, there's a good chance it's going to bump against something that's like got 250, maybe 300 in it, right? Maybe the person saved up a lot and put like 400 in it to overcast. They didn't need the 400, but they just want to be sure to keep it for the rest of the game. So it's really hard. You need to have accumulated a huge amount of nature gems in order to cast it safely. And here's the thing, like if you cast it with like 500, then you're probably going to keep it for the rest of the game, unless we go into super, super, super epic late game. But if you're casting it with like 300, because you want to make sure you overcast people who have overcast like gem generator globals, then 300, you're not guaranteed to keep it. Somebody could easily come in the late game and overcast it, and put a 500 into it. So that's a problem. So what I think is worth doing is putting up Gift of Health yourself first. Minimum cast. It actually doesn't cost a lot of nature gems. It's 50 gems. Probably somebody will steal it from you later on. But you then have the option. First of all, you're going to know who that person is, right? And you're going to be able to judge how much they put into it. It is very unlikely they put in 500 to overcast your Gift of Health. They probably put 200 in it, and then you can take it back in the supreme late game if you need to, if you still need more Tartareans. Actually, when you're ready to make Tartareans. So my idea here, I casted it already. I casted it a while ago, I think. I'm not ready to make Tartareans. I'm just getting it on the board. Somebody is probably going to steal it from me. Maybe they're going to make their own Tartareans. Maybe they're not. Like maybe I just keep it forever, right? Super cheap. Great. Maybe somebody steals it from me to make their own Tartareans. In the late game, when I'm ready to make my own Tartareans, I save up nature the whole mid-game, try to spend as little as possible, and then in the late game, you can steal Gift of Health back. I think that in the current meta, like that's kind of a necessary strategy for a nation like Tien, where you really, I think, are kind of dependent. Like Tartareans are... You need that. It's really filling a crucial role that you can't fill otherwise. Not all nations need to do this. I think a lot of human nations do, right? But not all some nations have great national summons that can fill in that role quite nicely. But I think a nation like Tien, I think this is an important strategy. Now, not to mention, like Gift of Health is actually just a great global, like otherwise, right? So not only does it heal everything, it increases your hit points by a ton. So, as long as you're actively pushing Dominion, it's great for defensive war. It's also great if you're doing mind hunting, because if you accidentally mind hunt something that was astral and you get feeble-minded, your guys will just come back. They'll recover eventually. So it is a great global to put up just in general. There's no doubt about it. For 50 nature gems, I think it's definitely worth it. Okay, I ended up talking a lot about Tartareans and Gift of Health in this episode, but and we're going to end the episode shortly, but this ties into sort of our research priorities and how we navigate the mid game, because we're navigating it. Obviously, in the mid game, you're almost always going to be involved in sort of your first or your second major war by now. So you have to devote a lot of resources to that war, but you have to keep your eye on the prize, right? What is my late game strategy going to end up being, and when can I reach those targets? So yes, part of my in-game strategy is to get Conjuration 9 to get Tartarians, but I can't do that until, I need a lot of investment in terms of, like, look, I only have 8 death per turn, right? I need to get my guys up to death 7. I need to make sure I have Gift of Health up at that time, right? There are a lot of things that we need to plan for in the mid game to make sure that we have the end game that we are going to need. So let's close this. Let's end this episode here. I'm gonna continue, and now we're gonna turn back to sort of the specific research paths that we took in this game and how that helped us win our war against Mictlan. So we'll be right back. See you guys soon. Take care.